So hello and welcome everybody to the Encoder UK Meet the Author session. This time we're meeting the author of our latest Don't Panic publication, which is the Don't Panic Guide, the Absolute Beginner's Guide to Agile in Systems Engineering. I need to make sure that I get the order of the words correct there, and we'll be asking Stuart about this later. So first of all, here's our author, Stuart Jobbins. So Stuart, welcome to the session.
Hi there.
The usual sort of set of questions. We really just try and get a feel for the book, where it started, what people can expect to get from the book, those sorts of things. And then later on, we'll be asking you a little about your sort of the way you go about writing and your writing style and that kind of stuff. So first of all, Stuart, just give us a quick overview. What's the book all about? It's agile. It's a big topic. It's certainly a popular topic. So what can people expect from the book?
Yeah, and quite a controversial topic, I expect, with most. Yeah, I suppose what can they expect from the book? They can expect really, I suppose, to address agile systems engineering as it applies to physical systems style engineering more than anything else. There is clearly a route, I think, for the IT style systems engineering into being nearly wholly agile, but for the rest of the physical world, which quite honestly, in my life has been the majority of the work that I do as a systems engineer and as a consultant. So that's why that's what it attempts to address. It sort of came about because I've been repeatedly asked the same set of questions, and I think the crux of that became when I was working on a regular basis with a large American defense company in the UK. Who were having agile imposed upon them, shall I say, by their American parent. And before they got to the point where the help arrived, they said to me, "Does anybody know anything about agile?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I do, but you ought to let it run its course and then come back to me and ask whether it worked or not." Suffice it to say that they had about a year's sojourn into agile and came back and said, "Why didn't we talk to you first, Stuart?" But and actually didn't take up much use of the agile. But that's just one particular case where they just tried to apply it, I think, probably mostly inappropriately from a very early stage. But yeah, that's how it came about, I suppose.
Because of course, the origins of agile, they tend to be used in the sort of software world, don't they? So
yeah, there's a significant use in the software world, and that sort of makes sense. There's two key tenets in the book that tell you whether agile is easily applied, basically. And one of those is the cost of refactoring. And in software, you haven't really got any production costs, so refactoring it largely is quite cheap. You know, it doesn't cost you that much. So you can take an agile approach of refactoring it very frequently and not incur too much of a cost. With a lot of physical systems engineering, you're having to invest, shall I say, in whether it be mechanical casings. And if you're in the prototype stage, often that's expensive machine from solid type life, or you're having to work out whether, I don't know, holes are allowable and the consequences. You know, I think of a nuclear reactor. Adding another hole at a later stage is probably an exceptionally priced item to try and do. So it's not something you'd probably want to try and take an agile approach with. But it's horses for courses, you know.
So again, having looked at the book, and again, to be honest, I've faced a lot of very similar questions, you know, over the years. Agile is certainly a very hot topic at the moment. And I think one that's often misunderstood, particularly, it's still in the world of software, but particularly in the world of systems engineering. And I know there's been some differences, and it's why I double checked to read the title out correctly. Is it Agile Systems Engineering? The title is Agile in Systems Engineering. And I remember when we were going through the review process, there were quite a lot of discussion around this point. So do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of conflation, shall I say, between agile systems engineering approaches, i.e. using agile approaches for your systems engineering, rather than the engineering of agile systems, those two being completely different animals. the latter one, the Agile Systems, is often very much conflated with modularity, product line engineering, etc. And they're all separate entities, and they all have separate rule sets and applicability. But even our own Incosi SE handbook starts to get those things a bit confused. So yeah, it is easy to get confused. But the Don't Panic guide is very much set at using Agile in systems engineering as its start point, although it does try to recognize the separation between those terms. Yeah.
Okay, so getting back to the sort of origins of this book, because it actually started off as a paper at our Agile Systems Engineering conference 3 or 4 years ago now.
I think the actual paper I think must have been in 22, ASIC in 22. But I actually wrote the paper on which it was based. In fact, I wrote essentially the whole of the book on which the paper became based, probably 2 years prior to that.
Because you said it was based on almost quite a white paper, but almost like a report you kind of written as evidence to give to different clients, or when they ask this question. As you say, it becomes so prevalent, this question. It was, well, I'm just going to write this up and then give it to you.
Exactly that. So I'd written a sort of position paper internally, and that was quite extensive. In fact, it was larger than Don't Panic Guide. And it had borrowed heavily from some of the stuff that Incosi had done, because Incosi had done a series of workshops with Bruce Powell Douglas, who some know from his IBM days, and he did about 12 workshops within Incosi, which were video shorts. And I used a lot of the stuff that came from his book, because he rightly pointed out some of the issues with Agile in systems engineering, but also I think you could see the roots of a software basis, shall I say, of software systems engineering, which comes through with Bruce. That's not a bad thing. It's still reasonably well applicable to those, but he seemed to have less exposure to, when I say, the physical systems engineering. So.
Okay, so the paper, on the basis of the paper, I believe you got invited to then, because you delivered the presentation, obviously,
Yep.
And I believe did it win best paper at the time?
It did win best paper, yeah.
That's me just allowing you to be modest, Stuart. So, and on the basis of that, it got a very good response, and you were asked to then deliver it as an online presentation again for a number of different organisations.
I was, yeah, in fairly quick succession. There were a number of companies and individuals who wanted to do that, and that included some Incosi UK chapters. It included some international companies who just wanted to get a view. So yeah, I did quite a few presentations very quickly based on that paper.
Okay. And I think that's the point, isn't it? When it was, and it's not the first time this has happened and resulted in a Don't Panic guide. That was the point when you were telling me that you've been invited, that it was, well, hang on a minute, there's something here there. Maybe this could be written up as a Don't Panic guide. And this was one of the occasions. Like I said, there's a number of the Don't Panic guides. Actually, the origin has been, it's either won best paper or it's been very well received at a conference. And we've sort of said to people, have you considered submitting this as a Don't Panic? So it's actually got quite a history. So in terms of the content itself, so what can people actually learn from the book? So for example, do you have to know anything about Agile before reading the book, or will it give you some of the fundamentals of Agile, or does it assume prior knowledge?
I think you can get away with no prior knowledge. I mean, most people on the street have some understanding of what Agile is trying to do, even if it's from some of the mechanisms like Scrum and elements like that they know from the terminology and the idea of stand-up meetings. I've tried to reintroduce what I call the key assertions to the elements of Agile, especially where they're applicable to the system engineering approach. I've also used a lot of insight that's come from Mayer's book on Agile, which he sort of did, it must be 15 years ago now, took a look at all the various Agile techniques in the software arena and compared them and tried to understand what was right, what was wrong, what was anecdotal rather than reality, which is a very useful source of information in trying to assess whether not necessarily the approach of Agile is right, but the things that they claim they do better, and whether they're unique to Agile, and whether they really are better or not. So, for instance, a lot of Agile claims are made with a start point of trying to diss the V life cycle, when of course we all know the V life cycle was really put up as an element of this doesn't work type approach when it was originally proposed. And I think people misunderstand the V as being a timeline rather than being an association and representation of the connection of the various processes within the life cycle. So yeah, it's a useful useful start point if you know nothing about Agile, I think, but it's not going to teach you Agile, put it that way.
Okay. And what about this thing, the Agile Manifesto? How does that fit into things?
The reason I took that on and the sort of the rule set and mindset that goes with Agile was because there's a lot of wording in there which is very specific to a software regime. And although the manifesto itself is really about, what shall I say, biasing your priorities between getting work done rather than documenting work and those sort of things, the actual tenets of Agile are then talking about the customer and the customer being the team, which in a system perspective is often very difficult because we don't tend to have a single customer per se, but a lot of different stakeholders, often who are in tension. And the idea of maybe expanding the Agile view to having the customer in the team, you'd have to have a representative from each of these stakeholders, and that starts to get quite difficult. It also implies that you have coordination, i.e. the teams are close together, they hear all the conversation that's going on, and in some sort of osmotic way are able to absorb all the conversations going on, so everybody's at the same level, etc. That really doesn't fit with a lot of way that system engineering is done, which is often, for complex physical systems, it's rare that you've got the suppliers and yourselves in the same room. If you've got somebody who's representing the supplier, you'd be lucky to be in the same room. And you're talking about lots of different disciplines often involved. So the language they use is very different. And a system engineer's job is almost this universal translator anyway between all these disciplines and all these stakeholders whose language he's got to understand and get it back to some sort of uniform and consistent view of life. So some of the techniques in Agile really don't fit directly to a system engineering life. So I had an attempt to try and redraw, shall I say, the principles of Agile as they applied to system engineering without trying to change them too much.
I think this issue of stakeholders, it was absolutely key because I know in some of the stuff that we've discussed previously, I mean, just the sheer sort of diversity of stakeholders now compared to even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it's orders of magnitude bigger. And so, this idea of making the assumption that you've got a very narrow set of stakeholders, and also, as you say, that you've actually got access to and that you can communicate with. And I think it's, to my mind personally, it's one of the big differences between the software engineering world and the systems engineering world. It's this idea of just the diversity, the variety, and the sheer number of different stakeholders that we have.
Yeah.
And so I know you looked at a number of different sources. You've already mentioned some. You mentioned the Bruce Powell Douglas stuff, the Mayer stuff, the manifesto. Now, one of the problems that we often get as systems engineers is trying to find sources that are actually consistent with each other, and getting different interpretations, different opinions and things. So, how did this come out when you were looking at this sort of the background material that's out there?
Yeah, that's quite interesting. So I thought I'd hit upon a set of books that I thought were useful, considering I'd written the paper some 3 or 4 years ago now, and clearly there are other groups like the INCOSE Agile group that were doing their own thing alongside in that same time. So when it came to review, I think the reviewers had different opinions or ideals about what should be included, and also included more modern material, shall I say, than I had concluded, because I'd written it sort of 4+ years ago. That wasn't a major problem, except the book was already over full, and the only reasonable way to accommodate them was by adding in references to the material that they described. So I attempted to do that. Unfortunately, with the Don't Panic format, you are quite restricted. You know, the page count and some illustrations, you can soon burn up 60 pages. That's no trouble at all. So trying to keep focus on what's important, while referencing the right set of material that supports that, is actually quite tricky. You can't include everything. It's as simple as that. You know, just don't
And
have the
I think
other
that
space.
came out in the because, like I say, you mentioned you used the word controversial earlier, and I think that's probably a bit strong, but there's certainly I hadn't quite appreciated just how many different opinions there were concerning Agile, and actually how some of them were quite opposed to each other. It was some of them weren't just variations on we use one word, you use another, language type stuff. It was really people at loggerheads within the Agile community
Yeah.
with each other. So, and I know you spoke to a number of different sort of groups and different people, but how on earth do you start to address that and bring it together in some sort of coherent format?
Tricky, and I imagine that the review process that I went through was probably more protracted than you would get on most Don't Panic guides. But in the end, you have to get to a point where you're keeping consistent with the focus of what you're trying to tell, and at least giving a nod to the people that have written other things. You know, like any system engineering, it's about knowing which bits to include and which bits to ignore at the moment. Not meaning they're disregarded, but just they're not in focus when you're trying to, you know, approach that particular topic. And I've tried to do that. I've tried to sort of leave out the material that's not appropriate, and lead people into reading the bits that maybe they should take up as additional reading if they really want to know about all these other items. It's the same with the product line engineering, the modularity type approaches. You know, there's lots of overlap in some of these spaces, and you need to be able to lead the reader into where should he go to get more definitive items for that without polluting the focus.
Yeah, and I think that you've done a very good job. I think that does come across, just this sort of variety of different sort of opinions that we have. So, and so let's talk a little bit about. You mentioned the reviewing process. Let's talk a little bit about the writing of the book. So let's talk about the actual process that we went through, and then I'm going to ask you about your writing style later.
Yeah.
So, and it's interesting because different ones of these guides, we've got 9 guides at the time of recording this at the moment. We've got another 4 or 5 in the pipeline. Some of them take a few months to do. Some of them take a couple of years. And I think with you, as you said, the writing of the thing was almost the easy part. That was done very quickly. I remember from the time of the first submission in the initial review, where the idea gets reviewed and then accepted or rejected. It was accepted straight away. It was based on a paper. We know it had a good response. And I thought, oh, well, this will fly through. It had a very good response at the ASEC. You know, the reviewers were all glowing about it. And it, let's say, it wasn't problems. It was just people saying, oh, you know, have you thought of this? Different opinions on things. And so it actually went through the review process. I think a couple more iterations than typically we would go through. So what are your thoughts on that, Stuart?
I think that's possibly, you know, symptomatic of what is a good system engineering topic. You know, our life is about relationships with other things. So, you know, it's inevitable that people want to add hooks into that and hook it to everything else, because it is, you know, at the end of the day, it's a process, you know, or it's a method, maybe, rather than a process that you want to apply. So there's lots of opportunities for this to be deployed in different contexts. And I think people wanted to see it in their own context. Unfortunately, you can only write a book from one context. So you have to set out that context right at the beginning. And if it doesn't match other people's context, then possibly they're not going to get the same views out of it. Or maybe they're expecting a different focal point. there's not much you can do once you commit to writing a book. You're writing it from one perspective, one context.
I mean, and what it did show is just there's obviously a lot of sort of passion about this as a subject, because there are a lot of opinions and a lot of people. And like I said, I know you spoke to a lot of different people, a lot of different groups on this. And so, in terms of the so I'll say it wasn't the writing as such that took time; it was the actually getting through the review. But as we know, that there's a standard process that all the publications go through, and this was part of it. So it was very pleased to see it. It was a bit of a sigh of relief from the council when it finally got through. I'm sure it was from you as well, Stuart, at the time. So in terms of the way that you write, what's your writing style? So for example, my main collaborator, is Simon Perry, and we've got very different writing styles. I tend to just do a sort of mental dump and a single draft. Simon plans everything, every sentence very meticulously and so on. And so it's very different styles, but it kind of works together. So what's your style? Do you plan everything meticulously? Do you just pour things out? How do you approach writing?
Two methods, and then an attempt to make them meet in the middle. I usually start out with the intent of having a nice structure, but I often find that once I start writing, you get in the flow, and I just want to brain dump everything I've got as I think about it. I'm not even, it doesn't necessarily have any structure, and I'll go back and chop it around until I can make a story that fits together. And that's necessary because there's sort of lots of little blind alleys that you could end up going off down and putting more detail into, but you just need to cut short to keep your focus on the things that are important. If we to look to my original paper, there's certainly a lot more material about Agile Systems Engineering, as in the engineering of Agile systems, and modularity and product line engineering, because that's something that I spent a lot of my life defining and designing. And so it was much harder to sort of exclude that material than I thought. Actually, staying on focus to the Agile Systems Engineering was quite tricky, without wanting to put in big chapters saying, but you need to know about this stuff as well, because it's also emotive. There's an emotional flow when you're trying to almost transfer knowledge, but you've got to limit it to the item in focus. So so I start off with the structure, and it's not necessarily going to be the right fit. So there's an element of, once you've got the material down, you can look back at the outline and see whether that fits. In fact, that's the very same process that Jess and I, Jessica Korzienska and I, are going through at the moment, trying to write another book where we brain dumped a whole load of material. We had a good idea and theme for structure, and quite honestly, we just couldn't make it fit. So recently, we've just decided that structure is not going to work, and we've come up with another idea of structure to try and contain the material, because we think we now understand the focus we want to put on the material. So it's sort of organic, really, the process at the end of the day.
Okay. And do you enjoy writing then?
Yeah, when I get the time. It's one of those things that I find you can't easily dip in and out of. I need a good run at it, and once I'm started, I don't want to be disturbed. I just want to be let go and just keep on writing, and I'll come back and refine it later, but just get the material down. Once I'm in the flow, it just got to come, and then just stop, and then come back to it and re-review that and say, well, okay, did that fit the purpose? What was I trying to say? And revise the wording. And I definitely need another as a reviewer. My style and prose probably is not good, and so because I'm writing fast at the time that I'm putting it out in that flow, so going back and refining sentences, paragraph, etc., is definitely a secondary step that needs somebody else's viewpoint, I think.
I'll say it was an incremental and iterative approach that you adopted.
Almost, yeah.
If only there was a book on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also bearing in mind, I mean, you've already mentioned the idea of, and we get this. I think the majority of authors that we have on to say, one of the most challenging aspects is narrowing it down. So you went from quite a substantial paper right down to a 6-page paper for the ASEC, for the Annual Systems Engineering Conference, then back up to 55 pages. And as you say, bear in mind that's 55 pages, including the references, including all the diagrams and so on. It's not actually anywhere near 55 pages of text. It's not nearly as long as people think. So was that a problem for you? How did you cope with that?
Yeah, I think the space used up by illustrations, you tend to underestimate. You know, I would think even with the relatively limited number of illustrations I put in the book, it probably consumes 30 or 40% of the page count, you know, if in reality. So you need to think hard. You're actually aiming probably at 40 pages of content at most. And then by the time you bring out some of your highlight boxes in the don't panic format, you're probably taking another 10% out again. So, you know, it very quickly erodes the page count in terms of the word count. You know, so if you're just drafting something in pure text, 30 pages of text is probably all you're going to need, as long as it's well honed. Yeah, 30 pages is probably your max.
And I think you're right, because as systems engineers, we tend to visualize a lot, don't we? And so obviously things like diagrams, images, and so on are sort of prevalent in many of the books. And I think this is something that people don't quite sort of get their head around all that often.
Yeah. I mean, my life now consists often of writing reports, and I find myself writing 40, 50-page reports in a day or two, literally, because I'm including diagrams, images, etc. And the rest of the report is really just supporting the conclusions drawn from those.
Writing words around the around the concepts and the ideas, the models, and so on. Okay. Right, so we're going to, so anybody does have any questions, you want to type them into the chat. We've already had a couple, I'll then put them to Stuart. So Stuart, you've already hinted that there's more to come. So can you give us an idea of what that is? You've hinted that you're writing with Jess Korzanowska, another established Cozy UK authors.
Yeah, I mean that's come about. I'm 65 in 2 weeks' time, so you know I'm getting to that far end of my career, and I've been lucky. I think I've jumped around in different industries almost my entire career, and I think that's helped me a great deal in having a different perspective, because I've not become monorailed by being just in a defense environment, or being just in a rail environment, or just in a nuclear environment, or just in an aerospace environment. And they all have their different biases, and if you're immersed in those continuously, you end up with this sort of one way of thinking. So I felt, you know, I've got all this experience that I can abstract away from the industry and give some insight. But at the same time, the people I really wanted to encourage was the youngsters to not make the same mistakes, basically. There's a lot of youngsters out there with lots of good ideas, and in some cases are being suppressed, I suppose, by senior engineers who say, no, this is the way that we do it, or, you know, or system engineering is requirements engineering, and those sort of probably outmoded views of life from my point of view, in terms of what a system engineer's life really should be about. So I found in Jess an author who has a very impressive style in terms of being more magical, fantastical, and is able to get in touch with a younger audience. I don't mean younger as being a bit ageist, an audience that's an earlier point in their career, shall I say, in systems engineering.
So kind of, yeah, what we refer to as early career. So maybe people who are just moving into systems engineering from another discipline, grads, apprentices, or, you know, age isn't necessarily
and recognizing a lot of system engineers, certainly in my era, you didn't come academically trained as a system engineer. It really wasn't understood. Personally, I migrated from an embedded systems and software background, and that's where I found that I was doing more work in the systems arena than was in the software arena by a long way. Having to talk to hydraulic engineers, electronic engineers, electromagnetic engineers, you know, my job wasn't actually writing software at all. My job was talking to all these stakeholders and understanding the art of the possible, and what was risky and what was not, and why these things didn't have the nice linear behavior that you expected them to as a simple engineer. Why does this electromagnetic valve not just go on and off? Well, actually, there's a lot of dynamic and ballistic control in this thing. So if you want to move it faster, you've got to understand where all those issues are coming from. So you start out with these simple models, and you need to uncover them. You need to expose more and more detail. I suppose when I met you, John, what 20 plus years ago, probably. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we were definitely talking from the same hymn sheet, which was, about understanding how unpacking this stuff helped you understand it, understand the relationships between things, and then understand how you devise a solution that could optimally meet all the stakeholders' needs, not necessarily satisfy them, but make the best shot. And I think that's the other thing. System engineering is not a perfect world. It's about finding the best compromise in a lot of cases. So
it's interesting because of this background you're saying, with the sort of mixed disciplines and no particular industry and this kind of stuff, and stakeholder engagement has come up again. Do you think that's kind of naturally led you or led Agile to you? Because it seems to be a few of the things you've just mentioned are
yeah,
kind of key elements of the book, or certainly discussion points in the book.
I think you end up reading an awful lot because of that. And then I got immersed in an awful lot of customer programs as a consultant, and also in some of my permanent employment tasks. We'd already tried some of this stuff and failed. I'm being honest here. We had failed at some of this stuff, whether that's we weren't living it well enough, or we didn't understand what we needed to do, in the changes to make it work. But they're all still good experiences in terms of teaching you why you didn't get there, or and not. There's a hell of a lot of good intention that often get blames on the wrong things, like we're using the wrong tool, or our process is not fit for purpose. They're all, you're as an engineer, you're all within your control to change.
So on that note, then, we've got a question about about methodologies, or any particular methodologies do you think more suitable for systems engineering than others as opposed to software? So things like Scrum, Kanban, Lean, these kinds of things, or is it just horses for courses? So,
I think it's horses for courses. I mean, system engineering is such a big topic. I would never claim myself to be, a good at the mechanical systems of your life, because my entire career has been oriented around software intensive systems, i.e. controlled by software. So a central brain, even from the 1980s, that was my job. So it's I've been in that arena a long time, and I've watched these things grow from the sidelines, and you can see in the context in which they're born what they're trying to solve.
mm.
Often they're maybe publicized or highlighted for the wrong reasons, and then people jump on the bandwagon because, especially the business execs, they want you to go faster, cheaper, better. There are no shortcuts in life. If it was possible to do things faster, cheaper, at higher quality, then everybody would be doing it. You get disruptors that find a way to do a particular solution faster, cheaper, quicker, a better quality. But often they're trading something else, and that's the bit that often goes unseen. I don't know. You have to make up your mind. Yeah.
But by the very nature of systems engineering, one thing we can all agree with is we're dealing with complex systems, and with complexity, yes, it's complex by nature. There's only so much you can boil that down and make it quicker and so on. We're dealing with inherently more complex systems, and the complexity is increasing all the time as we progress. So another question we've had then related to that is, so what about how do we monitor and control these? If somebody's applying something like an agile methodology for the first time, first of all, how important is it to monitor and control that? And are there any particular recommendations on how to do that?
So sticking with the context of being physical systems here for a moment, when you're starting to understand the problem and put the solution together in a logical creation, as it were, well, from modeling world, you see that complexity. Yeah, you see that born by the interfaces. You see that born by the relationships between items. For me, that's one of the keys that helps you understand whether an agile methodology is going to help or not. If you have lots of disconnected elements or largely coherent elements that have limited relationships, then there's quite an opportunity for using agile, because you might be able to think far enough ahead and accommodate all the future change needs in some sort of architectural structure. And I think even if you look at the life of agile, that's changed over that same period to do the same sort of thing. There's a sort of an architectural operations view now ahead of agile that says, well, okay, doing it all first and then recognizing we don't have this bit and then going back and refactoring stuff. There are risks involved in that we can't accommodate the refactoring. So how do we think about what we've got to accommodate up front to allow the agile mechanisms to proceed, if necessary, in isolation on individual elements? So for some systems, that sort of makes sense. But as you said, with our complex systems, inevitably one of the things we're going is you've got more interconnectivity. And that makes it harder to unpick things and harder to second guess what the solution is going to be by just looking at one layer of decomposition, say, at the architectural level. You've almost got to run a lot of the levels before you start to understand where the complexity exists. It may not be apparent at the first level of decomposition. It might be inside some component. There's horrendous complexity. If you can do it all in software, then of course you've got the flexibility and therefore an agile approach works. But if you're having to commit stuff to an ASIC, for instance, okay, a lot of people use FPGAs nowadays, but if you still had to spin an ASIC at £1 million a pop every time you spin it, you're going to want to get it right. You can't afford the time and effort to get that wrong. So, the idea of refactoring at that stage becomes a commercial issue. Not just a performance issue.
Stuart, so we've already mentioned, so more to come. So you've got at least one other writing project on the horizon, and anything else that we can look forward to in the future?
If I look at the number of papers I've written over my career history that are just sitting here doing nothing, gathering dust, there ought to be more. Given that I have time, and maybe if I slow down as I approach retirement, maybe some of those will surface. I'm hoping they won't have aged so much that they're useless. Unfortunately, the business we live in maybe overtakes some of them. I don't know.
But I think I'm with you. It's the core principles and the core ideas and the core mindset. I think regardless of the the fancy methodologies and tools and the latest buzzwords or whatever, there's still this fundamental core behind it. And I think that's one of the things that you've managed that comes out in the book as well, is that there are fundamentals behind this that you've got to understand. And then you can choose an appropriate, well, first of all, is it appropriate for you? What are the appropriate tools and so on? And I think that definitely comes out in the book. So, Stuart, thanks very much for joining us. It's been a really interesting discussion. The book is available now from the Incozy UK website. If you go to the bookstore, it's available then. And we look forward to future publications for you, Stuart. In that case, okay?
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks.